Hello and welcome to History by Hollywood, a podcast series that examines the real events and people behind fact-based movies. This is episode 22 for Sunday, the 3rd of December 2017. And today's episode is 1960's Spartacus, the epic sword and sandals drama that starred Kirk Douglas in the eponymous role, Peter Ustinov, Laurence Olivier and Charles Laughton, along with a host of other Hollywood stars including Gene Simmons and Tony Curtis. My name is Andrew Blischik, and with me as ever is Martin Darlington.
Hello everybody. The little laugh you heard earlier is because I'd written in the script Sunday the 2nd of December 2017, so I got my days wrong. We've had a little bit of feedback after I plugged the Uncivil podcast, which continues to be excellent. Long-time listener and supporter and friend Gary Chavit tweeted, "Great, that's another 30 minutes of my week gone." Gary, you're welcome, buddy. And we also have a new review, and this is strange, I missed this. This was written on the 8th of October, so I'm terribly sorry we haven't acknowledged it till now. And it's from Mrs. Kirk Douglas from Croydon.
No relation?
I'm not sure. It may be Simone Higgins changing her name for the review, because she's Mrs. Tom Cruise on a Hollywood Personalities podcast, and she has done a fantastic one on Kirk Douglas. It's only 12 minutes. And it was done earlier, in fact this time last year, on the occasion of his 100th birthday.
Oh, I see.
Because of course Kirk is still alive and, well, I'd say alive and well. He's had a helicopter crash, aged 85, that he survived, and then he had a stroke, but he's still going.
What does the Mrs. Kirk Douglas from Croydon have to say about
So she says, "I've listened to all the episodes, well researched, well presented and very informative, especially the Dam Busters and Selma episodes. Keep up the good work." Thank you, Mrs. Douglas, and can you tell your husband we're huge fans?
And if any of you do use iTunes, Podbean, SoundCloud or YouTube to access us, it really does help us spread the word if you can click on the number of stars you feel we deserve. Mrs. Kirk Douglas gave us 5 stars, which is very nice. If you do have a few minutes, write a couple of words in your review. Lots of people will search using customer reviews to sort the results, which is why whenever you buy anything on eBay or Amazon, they pester you for a review of the product. It really helps, and the best ones will be added to our worthy recipients list, as we hope to have some HBH goodies early next year. The alternative is that Andrew and I will have to create fake iTunes accounts.
You're Andrew.
I'm Andrew. Thank you. The alternative is that Martin and I will have to create fake iTunes accounts, leave ourselves some rave reviews, and then we'll have less time to research and do new episodes.
Yeah, joking aside, it is really helpful if you can, and it's very encouraging and motivating for us. Looking forward, we are going to, due to overseas visits for the Christmas holidays and other stuff, we are going to take a winter break, looking at coming back for the 2018 campaign season on Sunday the 7th of January, and we'll let you know at the end of the show what that movie is going to be that we'll come back with. We do think that this is going to be a rather huge episode, so we're probably going to split this into 2. But if we do that, then part 2, you won't have to wait a fortnight. That will come out next week on the Sunday the 10th of December. Okay, so without further ado.
So first off, the story of the movie. Spartacus, as we say, is a 1960s sword and sandals Hollywood epic. It's set in the 1st century BC Rome's Republic. It tells the story of Spartacus's rise to the head of a slave revolt in Rome, which culminated in the Third Servile War of 71 BC. The movie is based on a novel of the same name, Spartacus, by Howard Fast. It became the pet project of the successful Hollywood actor Kirk Douglas, who was responsible for securing the film rights of the book, producing the film, and starring in the lead role as Spartacus.
Yeah, Spartacus was directed by iconic Hollywood director Stanley Kubrick, but he did have some frustrations making a film because he and Kirk Douglas intervened as producer quite a bit, and they did clash. Kubrick eventually disowned the film and never referred to it as his work, and he had replaced another director early on, hadn't he?
Douglas and Kubrick had already worked together on Kubrick's earlier successful movie, Paths of Glory, but as we say, they didn't have a happy relationship on the set of Spartacus. The screenplay was written by Hollywood stalwart Dalton Trumbo, then one of the Hollywood 10 authors, producers and directors that had been blacklisted by the studios in 1947 due to their communist sympathies. Trumbo and some of the other Hollywood 10 continued to get work while blacklisted, but only under pseudonyms. Trumbo originally planned to use the name Sam Jackson for Spartacus, but Douglas insisted that Trumbo use his own name. It was a very bold move by Kirk Douglas in Cold War America. The movie then instantly got the attention of anti-communist organisations, including the National Legion of Decency, who ended up picketing the movie on its release. And in fact, then President John Kennedy, who'd only been president for 2 weeks, famously crossed their picket line to see the movie in Washington, D.C., a move which marked the slow retreat of the blacklist. It started to fall out of favour, but it definitely hung around for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, Howard Fast had served 3 months in prison for contempt of Congress, refusing. Yeah, the author of the novel. He was brought in as a screenwriter, writing the screenplay as well as Dalton Trumbo, and he started writing the novel whilst he was in prison. And this was Joe McCarthy's the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Dalton Trumbo actually served 11 months in prison for the same offence of refusing to testify.
And there was a recent biopic about Trumbo.
Yeah, there was.
We could put that on the list, maybe,
Certainly
starring
could.
Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad fame.
Ah, right, yeah. Very, very talented guy. And a lot of these guys had been members of the Communist Party in the 30s or 40s, and often were no longer sort of active communists, but, in the land of the free.
Yeah, that was enough.
So in addition to Kirk Douglas, the film had a bunch of accomplished actors: Laurence, Olivier, Charles Lawton, Tony Curtis, Peter Ustinov. And in 1961, Peter Ustinov won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his portrayal of the Roman slave and gladiator trailer Batiatus.
The film was both a critical and financial success. You can see it's got currently a 96% positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It took in some $90 million worldwide, having cost just $12 million to make. It was nominated for six Oscars and won 4, including the Best Supporting Actor we've already mentioned, plus Oscars for Best Cinematography and Best Costume Design. Spartacus is just over 3 hours long. The exact length depends on which restored version you watch, and was filmed in Hollywood and on site in Spain. And
certainly doing the research for it, and watched a few interviews with Kirk Douglas and people talking about Kirk Douglas, and they said my admiration for the guy was pretty high. He's just a great epic actor anyway, but also really brave and principled, and absolutely adamant that anyone on this film will be credited in full. I don't care what their politics are, this is an entertainment business. But also, and think about the 1960s, and as we're going to hear, there are a lot of references to the human disease, or the disease of human slavery. And, we'll go through and we'll come across those themes of, quite righteous protest throughout the movie.
And I think the anti-communist stuff is one thing because of the association with the Hollywood 10, but I think it also struck a nerve because it's about a popular uprising, the masses rising up, very, communist sympathy, revolutionary and a threat to establishment America in some way. And I think Kirk Douglas kind of knew that. He knew that he was being very left-leaning and sympathetic to the underclass, obviously, in his portrayal of the movie.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the interviews has got a lovely comment. I think it was with Michael Parkinson, and he says, he was brought up hungry poor. Right? They were Russian emigres. His father was quite a brutal man. Kirk Douglas says, he was brought up. He had 5 sisters and a mother, and his father left the household. And he said it was one great drive to be a successful actor was to leave this house full of women. But he also said his wife laughs at him sometimes. This is his second wife of 63 years. They've been married now. And he said she laughs at him, saying, one day you're going to meet someone who once was poorer than you. So I do think he associates with what it's like to be, real hardship. The sources we've used for the reality check, the main contemporary source of sources is Gaius Sallustius Crispus, known today as Sallust. He was a teenager during the Spartacus War, so very contemporary. He'd later command a legion under Julius Caesar, and he wrote a lot about Spartacus, but little of his original writing survived in its original form to the modern day. Most of what we know about what he wrote is because he's referred to as a primary source by many later Roman writers.
Livy, the historian who lived a few decades after Spartacus, also wrote on the war, but again, little survives in its original form. In addition, Plutarch and Appian both wrote about Spartacus, but well over 100 years after the rebellion. Cicero, the great Roman orator and opponent of Caesar, lived through the rebellion, and it is often mentioned in his speeches and letters.
Yeah, we've also watched some documentaries between us. The Real Spartacus, a 2001 Channel 4 production from the UK, and Spartacus, a 1994 History Channel programme. We've also watched interviews. We've read various articles from both movie reviewers and historians, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading Barry Strauss's history of the Spartacus War. Barry Strauss is the head of history at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. It's an Ivy League university. I think there's a branch here, I believe.
My employer.
There you go. Andrew works for them, so they are definitely an excellent university. So yeah, we've plowed through. If anyone does want to read Barry Strauss's book, don't be put off if you're reading it on a Kindle. It says you're only sort of 50%, 55% through, and you think, but it's nearly all over. Because like the last 35% of the book is all references, bibliographies, and so thoroughly researched. Well, that was the story of the movie. What we're going to do now is the opening scene show slaves, and you can see Kirk Douglas is immediately visible, toiling under hot sun, carrying stones, you see. But we're going to listen to the opening narrative as heard in the movie. And it's quite interesting when you consider this film was being made in 1960 and you think what was going on in the southern states particularly.
In the last century, before the birth of the new faith called Christianity, which was destined to overthrow the pagan tyranny of Rome and bring about a new society, the Roman Republic stood at the very center of the civilized world. Of all things fairest, sang the poet, first among cities and home of the gods is golden Rome. Yet even at the zenith of her pride and power, the Republic lay fatally stricken with a disease called human slavery. The age of the dictator was at hand, waiting in shadows for the event to bring it forth. In that same century, in the conquered Greek province of Thrace, an illiterate slave woman added to her master's wealth by giving birth to a son whom she named Spartacus, a proud, rebellious son who was sold to living death in the mines of Libya before his 13th birthday. There, under whip and chain and sun, he lived out his youth and his young manhood, dreaming the death of slavery, 2,000 years before it finally would die.
So, after the opening narrative, setting the scene for a 1960s American audience, we know that Spartacus is a slave working in a Libyan mine. He's now a full-grown man toiling away. He stops to help a collapsed fellow slave, but gets beaten by a guard who he retaliates against and pins the guy to the ground and bites into his ankle. Then we meet a lanista, that's a gladiator trainer and owner, and his name is Batiatus, played by Peter Ustinov, who inspects some slaves to buy for his gladiator school. He sees Spartacus chained up for his biting, and Batiatus buys him, and next we see him arriving at the gladiator school where we meet Marcellus, a former slave/gladiator himself, and now the principal trainer. He gives a sword to Spartacus. He sees that he's got some fight in his eyes, and he challenges Spartacus to kill him with the sword. Spartacus refuses, despite Marcellus saying he's only got a wooden baton, to which the trainer comments, you may even be intelligent, and that's dangerous for a slave. He says this after Spartacus refuses to take the bait quite cleverly. In a communal bath area next, another gladiator warns Spartacus that Marcellus likes to kill a trainee every so often to instill discipline and fear in the remaining gladiators, and he thinks Spartacus may be chosen to be the next victim. We meet Draba, played by Woody Strobe, a black gladiator. Spartacus asks his name, to which Draba replies, "You don't want to know my name, and I don't want to know your name." Spartacus retorts, "It's just a friendly question," and Draba replies, "Gladiators don't make friends. If we end up in the ring together, I'll have to kill you."
Yeah, it's quite a brutal point made by Draba. Okay, we'll just wrap up the reality check. I mean, that opening narrative is fascinating more for what it says about 1960s America than it does about ancient Rome. The bit about Christianity was about to sweep away the tyranny of Rome. Well, not really.
That was
the imperial...
500 years off?
Yeah.
No.
400,
400,
yeah, before Constantine made it the official religion, and even then they still kept slaves.
And there was still 100 years until the death of Christ? No, 30, yeah, it's 100 years until the death of Christ.
But then the element about Spartacus, we're almost certain he wasn't born into slavery.
No.
But I think Kirk Douglas and the filmmakers are making a point there of the Romans later, some of the writers tried to suggest he was Thracian nobility, because it would be much easier for them to cope with being beaten by a noble, someone of aristocratic blood, rather than a slave, just a slave or a common soldier.
But he makes a point in the movie of saying that he was born of slaves, and a grandfather was a slave, and so he's Spartacus in the movie is a slave through and through. Whereas in reality, it looks like Spartacus was Thracian and was a soldier for the Roman army?
We think so, yeah. Either an auxiliary, he was certainly served in some capacity in the Roman army, which is where he'd have got a good idea about how they fought.
Tactics.
Thrace, modern Bulgaria, they all agree that's where he's from, but we know nothing about his birth and childhood. We don't know what crime led him to be enslaved.
To go from Roman soldier to slave?
May have been desertion, may have been dereliction of duty or theft. He is described as a big, strong man who inspired awe in those who saw him or heard him, because he was said to be a very good speaker and highly intelligent, which becomes clear later. And bear in mind, these accounts are written after he led a rebellion which, for over 2 years, from 73 to 71 BC, basically ran riot in Rome's backyard. He was enrolled in a gladiator school in Capua, along with two Celts, Crassus and Oenomaus. And the Lannister who bought them, on which Batiatus is based, his name was actually Cneius Cornelius Lentulus Vatia, and he was the guy who ran the gladiator school, and pretty sure they found the remains of that.
Capua was apparently it was the place for gladiator training. It's not too far from Rome.
Great climate,
and lots of lots of gladiator schools, and they will definitely exported and sold gladiators as slaves to fight all around the Roman Empire, apparently. Republic.
And okay, we've already had some departures from the truth, but again, I think we can understand why. I think this is aimed at the audience who would have been seeing it in 1960. Okay, next scene. Back in the movie, we see slave girls being allocated to gladiators, and we meet Varinia, played by Gene Simmons, who is given to one gladiator for the night as female companionship, only for Batiatus to intervene and tell her to go to Spartacus. Spartacus appears in awe and comments that he's never had a woman. Obviously, he's a lifelong slave working in mines. I guess he wouldn't have done. Varinia starts to undress when Spartacus hears laughter from above and realises that Batiatus and Marcellus, the gladiator trainer, are watching through a grate in his cell ceiling, and he roars, "I'm not an animal," to which Varinia comments, "Neither am I." It's a very, very good little comment. And they start to talk, but then Batiatus arrives and removes the girl.
Okay, so we've got the movie-long relationship established between Varinia and Spartacus. But if we want to comment on the reality of that, sadly it's wholly fictional. Spartacus did have a woman who accompanied him along the rebellion and was considered his wife, but we don't even know her name, simply that she was also a Thracian and adherent to the god Dionysus. She was seen as a prophet or a seer to many of the followers, and probably a big help in securing Spartacus' reputation as a gifted man, favoured by the gods who it was worth following.
Yeah, I think in the film it says Varinia describes herself as from Britannia.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas in fact it was a Thracian girl. Yeah,
and there was a reluctance, they say, on slaves to have children, to have sex and have children, because your offspring would be sold, would become property of the master. So maybe there's something behind the fact that they didn't want to consort at that stage when they were both enslaved.
Yeah, slaves with principles, I suspect. I'm sure there's some others who gave into carnal instincts, but yeah. Back to the movie, and there's a series of training vignettes, basically with Spartacus carrying out various training skills and sort of practice fighting, showing his strength, his skill. Varinia's working in the kitchens, but there's obviously a blossoming romance between them, or attraction, as they exchange glances, not glasses. And then we see Marcellus teaching the gladiators where to strike for a quick kill, or a crippling wound, or a slow kill. And he uses Spartacus as his model, and he paints different colours on him to say, there's a quick kill here, there's a crippling blow here. And he also notices Spartacus and Varinia making their silent looks at each other, and he mocks him or continues to torment him.
Then we have Batiatus. He's told that Marcus Licinius Crassus, played by Laurence Olivier, is arriving to visit his school. Crassus, very much one of the richest men in Rome, arrives with great pomp. Batiatus slobbers over his guests, men and women alike. Crassus says that they want to see a private viewing of 2 pairs of gladiators fight to the death. Batiatus is shocked and tells his guests that he can put on a pair's fight, but his gladiators are the finest in Italy, and once sold to new masters, the master then can do what they want with them, but here at Gladiator School they definitely do not fight to the death. Crassus then tells Batiatus that today will be an exception. He asks for Batiatus' price for the 4 men, and when Batiatus pitches for 25,000 sesterces, clearly an outrageous sum, Crassus simply says, arrange it. Then we see Spartacus and the Celt Crixus, played by John Ireland, hear that a fight to the death will be held, and they wonder what each other would do if they were drawn together to fight.
Yeah, Crassus's lady companions choose the gladiators. Crixus is chosen first, followed by a gladiator called Galeno. Then Draba, he's chosen next, and Batiatus tries to direct the ladies to another gladiator, but they both choose Spartacus. Batiatus says, he's a coward, but the ladies are immovable, saying to the Lanista that if they refuse to fight, he should get Marcellus' trainer to slit their throats. So Varinia's serving wine, meanwhile back in their sort of viewing balcony with their rich guests, and she's being leered at by both Crassus and his male guest, Marcus Glabrus, played by John Dahl. She spills wine over Glabrus, and we see it's quite deliberate, to Batiatus' horror, but Crassus says he's quite amused, and so's Glabrus really. And then Crassus says to Batiatus he'll buy her after he learns she's from Britannia and she has some spirit. He offers 2,000 sesterci for Varinia, and he's told she'll be waiting for him by his litter. And Crassus also tells Glabrus that as a wedding present to, I think it's Crassus's niece,
some relative,
or friend or relative, he's now commander of the garrison of Rome, a prestigious appointment.
Okay, so
reality.
How do they go with that? We're meeting historical figure Crassus. So how did they do with that? Marcus Licinius Crassus, as we say, he was very much a real character and was said to be the richest man in Rome, and he would go on to be part of Rome's first triumvirate, like a dictatorship, which included Crassus, Pompey the Great, and Julius Caesar in a few years' time. Whether he ever visited Spartacus's Capua Gladiator School, we don't know, but he will have a part to play in the reality of Spartacus's rebellion later on.
Yeah, the bit about gladiators fighting to the death, it's less common than it's thought. I think most people watching Hollywood films assume that someone always died, and that's far from the case. The fighters were expensive to buy and train and maintain in a peak of fitness, and Lanistas were loath to see their investments and efforts wasted. And whilst gladiators obviously would die in the arena, if both had fought well, the most common result would be for the crowd to call for the loser to be spared to fight again another day. Any incompetence or cowardice, however, would bring forward calls for the loser to be killed.
And we saw in the movie too, there was a moment of death had to be decided, like you would think in a crowd with a thumbs up and a thumbs down. One of the female colleagues gives the thumb down, and I don't know whether we mentioned this before with
We may have done in Gladiator.
but there's no evidence that actually ever happened in any circumstance.
The reference that I remember reading from one of the Roman writers said they made the sign with their thumbs and he was spared.
Right.
But it doesn't say what that sign is. So it could be anything.
Yeah.
Some historians have said that, in fact, Barry Strauss in his book says it's reversed. Thumbs up means kill him, thumbs down means spare him. We'll never know, really.
It's good theatre, though. It's good Hollywood either way.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got Crassus on the scene now. So back to the movie.
Yeah.
We see Spartacus, Crixus, Drabba and the other gladiator chosen to fight, preparing for their show match. Crixus and his opponent enter the ring first, but the scene shows Spartacus watching through a gap in the wooden door to their holding area.
Yeah, we don't really get to see their fight very
we
clearly,
hear it
do we?
Off camera, as it were. Drabba's in the same little holding pen with him, and in a very powerful scene, Drabba makes Spartacus feel ashamed for watching the death of the two colleagues out there. In other words,
Drabba just stares at Spartacus, doesn't he? And when he catches his eye, you see him sort of look down, and you can see he desperately wants to watch it, whether it's through professional curiosity or morbid curiosity, I don't know.
But it's a good scene.
But
Drabba does a really good job
at
at convincing us and everybody instantly that the last thing you want to do is behave like a Roman, egging on the gladiators to fight to the death.
Yeah, no, totally. But Crixus, Drabba's almost making Spartacus feel he's as bad as the rich Roman audience. But Crixus kills his opponent, and then it's the turn of Spartacus and Drabba. Varinia is the slave girl watching from a balcony as the gladiators square off. Spartacus fights with sword and buckler like a small shield. Drabba has the trident spear and a net. The Roman ladies are transfixed, but Crassus and Glabrus almost appear bored talking politics and what's going on in Rome. And the fight ebbs and flows, but eventually Drabba disarms Spartacus and holds his trident to the loser's neck. The ladies, as we discussed with the thumb, down. In the film, as has become common, they hold the thumb down and start shouting, "Kill him, kill him." And then Drabba you see him look at Spartacus, look at them, make a decision, turns and launches his spear, which just misses Crassus as the screaming ladies flee. And then he starts climbing up towards the viewing balcony. A guard throws a spear and hits him in the back. And then Crassus, in an incredibly sinister, calm manner, pulls a dagger out, reaches down, and just stabs Drabba in the neck. So he dies, but Spartacus lives.
Yeah.
And we've got no reality check on that, because
that's just good fiction.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, on their way to the cells that night, the gladiators walk past Drabba's hanging body upside down. We see Spartacus, Crixus, and the others lying silently awake. The next morning, they're led out to breakfast with their evil coach Marcellus, taunting Spartacus, telling him that Varinia has been sold to Crassus, and so he'll never get to see her again. That something snaps in Spartacus, and he then lunges at Marcellus, gripping him by the neck. The other trainers go to assist their boss, but the other gladiators jump up, grab them, and quickly kill or disable them. Spartacus drowns Marcellus in the morning soup. The soldier blows his whistle and reports to Badiatus and tells a servant that he'll deliver Varinia to Crassus personally and drive away in a horse-drawn cart rather than stay and face the possible insurrection. The gladiators break out of their compound, attacking guards with anything at hand. With each guard killed, another gladiator has a proper weapon, which he can then use to take on the next guards. Streaming out of the unguarded gates, Badiatus' slaves make their dramatic escape.
Yeah, I mean, this whole sequence of events is lifted from Howard Fast's novel, which, whilst based on the true story of Spartacus' rebellion, is a work of fiction. But what we do know is there was somehow Spartacus, Crixus, and a few others managed to persuade 200 gladiators to rebel. The plan was said to include gaining access to the armoury to properly equip themselves with swords, spears and shields. Inevitably, the plan was betrayed, but when they realised it was rumble, they still managed, 74 gladiators still managed to get out, fight their way out of the gladiator school, using basically utensils from the kitchen, although I'd guess a meat cleaver in the hands of a 6-foot Thracian gladiator would be pretty effective. But of course we don't know how many died. Maybe all 200 rose up, but they lost over 100 to the guards.
Yeah, but 70 survived to go on and lead the rebellion.
Yeah.
I did smile when the guard literally blew the whistle, because I'm sure it was like an umpire's whistle with a little P spinning around, and I don't know whether that's a Roman artifact or not.
Affected. I think that's, if you go to one of the movie goof sites, that's probably in there.
Perhaps.
And I'm sure Spartacus is the one with the famous, there's a truck driving across the hillside in the background, but I've never actually spotted it.
There's another one in El Cid, but that might be the wristwatch. But yeah, there's a few. There's quite a lot of those.
I've got to be honest, I'm not that bothered about that, because they're unintentional gaffes. We're more interested in the deliberate ones.
Yeah.
So, back in Rome, back to the movie, the Senate had been told that Spartacus's band have grown, attracting other slaves or forcing them to join the outlaws, rampaging through the Campanian countryside around Capua, and they've established a camp on the slopes of Vesuvius. Senator Gracchus, played by a corpulent and aged Charles Lawton, but played beautifully, proposes that Marcus Glabrus, the new commander of the Roman garrison, take 6 cohorts to defeat the slave army. Gracchus proposes to give the temporary command of the Roman garrison in Glabrus's absence to Gaius Julius Caesar, played by John Gavin.
At Crassus's country villa, he gets to see 6 slaves, gifts to him from the governor of Sicily. One is called Antoninus, played by Tony Curtis, who is a teacher of classics and a singer. So clearly no warrior. Crassus appoints him as his body servant. Glabrus has come to see Crassus, and he gloats that he's off with 6 cohorts to fight Spartacus and his slaves. Crassus learns that it was Gracchus, Charles Lawton's character, his idea, and realises that Glabrus has been hoodwinked and is cleared out of Rome to neuter Crassus's political ambitions.
Yeah, when he's got the Rome garrison commander in his pocket, he would obviously be in a powerful position, and now he's been neutered, but he almost smiles in admiration at how Gracchus pulled it off. But we realise that Glabrus is a bit of a simpleton.
Yeah.
He's a bit of a Tim Nice but dim aristocrat, and he well born and not much of a thinker.
Yeah, and it was Glabrus, remember, that was sitting in the gallery watching the Spartacus gladiatorial battle.
Yeah.
So that both Crassus and Glabrus have now seen Spartacus, and they don't realise perhaps who he is and who they're going to face in future.
Reality on all of that. The shock amongst the Senate mainly seems to have been generated by the number of senators who owned rich farms and vineyards in Campania, the region where Spartacus and his band were operating. They don't seem to have thought that it was anything more than a localised minor uprising. The character Senator Gracchus, wonderfully played by Charles Lawton, is fictitious, but again we see this name Gracchus being used and given to an opponent of the elite patrician class, represented here by Crassus, which is interesting because Crassus was his family went back a long way, but they'd fallen on hard times, and he wasn't a senior patrician by birth, and he also was not he didn't live luxuriously. He had collected money, but he spent it for political power. He was actually quite a Spartan living guy, so it's slightly changed out, but certainly the partisan politics and backstabbing seems to have been a leading feature of Roman politics from the first recorded days of the Republic, and hey, some things never change.
The person charged with defeating the slaves, at first, as we say, Rome just thought it was a bunch of slaves causing a little bit of mischief, not a potential third servile war. The first 2 servile wars having occurred in Sicily 60 and 30 years earlier. Was Gaius Claudius Glaber, not Marcus Glabrus. Glaber was a praetor, the rank below senator, who, far from being given 6 cohorts of the elite Roman garrison, was told to raise troops on his march south to confront Spartacus. This is not as unexpected as it sounds, as Rome is only now beginning to move from a volunteer citizen army made up of farmers and tradesmen to becoming a full-time professional army in the late Republic and early Empire. So many of the men that they met on their way would have served before and had been trained.
Yeah, but certainly they were no regular standing legion, no. And they obviously didn't expect much of a problem. So back to the movie, and we see Spartacus's slave army or rebel army seen raiding the country estates, and as they take foodstuffs and property and gold and the like, they also free the slaves. He returns to their erstwhile home near Capua, and he finds some of his troops indulging in a gladiatorial contest, and he stops it, only to be challenged by Crassus, who's like, what the hell do you think you're doing? And Spartacus says, Draba made a decision never to tolerate another man versus man contest. He kept that promise, and so will I, and that was Spartacus's response. So he basically bans his army indulging in gladiatorial fights.
Or even, weren't they two Romans that they captured and were taunting them to fight, and he even insisted we don't support this in any way?
Possibly, yeah. I'm not sure about that one. But Crassus backs down, and Spartacus launches into a harangue of the assembled and largely drunk ex-slaves. He's got answers to all the challenges to his assertion that they can be more than a drunken raiding group, they can be an army. Someone calls out they can cross the Alps and be free. Another says we can't cross the Alps because every pass is guarded by its own legion. And Spartacus says we don't need to. We can cross the sea, march to Brundisium and hire ships from Sicilian pirates. So they raid estates around the countryside, freeing slaves who gleefully join the growing army. And at one estate, Spartacus comes across Varinia, and their reunion is emotional. She tells how she ran away from the cart, and Batiatus, the gladiator trainee, was too fat to chase her, so they have a good laugh together.
They're reunited.
Yeah. So,
back to reality?
Yeah, reality check.
Yeah, well, Spartacus and Crassus are shown in the movie as Spartacus the leader and Crassus as his lieutenant. In reality, Crassus and initially Oenomaus were co-leaders along with Spartacus. The two Celts next to Spartacus were very influential amongst their own people, the other Celts, and Gauls and Germans that were part of the rebellion. Spartacus' portrayal as being vehemently against gladiatorial contests, regardless of the origins of the protagonist, is a fiction, as we will see later. It works for the purposes of the movie to show Spartacus an honourable and principled man, and this seems to have been his character, as there are reports, presumably taken from interrogations of captured rebels, that he tried to limit looting, rape and general killing, although not always with much success. The whole plan about heading south to Brundisium is kind of true, but it skips over a year and a half of manoeuvring and war that we'll try and cover soon, as briefly as possible.
Yeah. The next scene we see is Batiatus is now eating at Gracchus's table as they talk about women and morals and Rome. Now, Gracchus has been established as the arch enemy, politically speaking, of Crassus. Batiatus complains about Crassus and says that Varinia was Crassus's property when she ran away to join Spartacus, and yet he hasn't paid. Gracchus offers Batiatus 500 sesterci for the first option on her when Varinia is recaptured. And when Batiatus says, but why would you pay me that money when there's no certainty she will be recaptured? And he says, just to annoy Crassus. Meanwhile, yeah, it's a slightly strange scene.
I agree.
The Crassus having a bath.
Oh, yeah, then this slightly bizarre scene, as Martin says. We see back to Crassus's mansion. He's having a bath administered by the Tony Curtis slave Antoninus. Crassus asks Antoninus about what sort of tastes he have, and asks would he eat oysters and not snails. Crassus seems to be suggesting that there are appetites and tastes, and that can go in two different ways. And therefore taste is not subject to morals. It's a clear seduction. It's a very awkward seduction, but it's a clear seduction that he's trying to get Antoninus, to have sex with him somehow. And he tells the slave that Crassus's own taste includes both oysters and snails.
Yeah, and he goes on this sort of slightly rambling philosophical monologue as he stands on the balcony with Antoninus initially behind him as they watch garrison troops marching out on their way to Vesuvius and Spartacus's camp. And then he goes on, and then he says something about Rome, and the only way to deal with Rome is to love her and serve her. And he turns around and Antoninus has just disappeared. It's like, what? Where did he go?
Well,
it's I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's 1960s sensibilities.
Okay.
And
Let's do. There's no real history around that. That's all fictional. No. But if we just pause for a minute, I think the version that you and I both watched would have been a restored version from the 50th anniversary or the 40th anniversary, because apparently that scene between Crassus and Antoninus was cut from the original movie.
Right.
And maybe it was obvious to do that because it was, it was a bit awkward. It didn't quite make a lot of sense. But apparently when they restored it to whatever re-release, the audio had gone. So they had the footage.
Ah, yes, I remember hearing this.
And Tony Curtis was still alive to do the voice of Antoninus. But of course, Laurence Olivier had passed away. So Laurence Olivier's wife suggested that they use Anthony Hopkins as a Laurence Olivier impersonator. That's how bizarre. But I didn't know that when I was watching the movie. I mean, from an audio point of view, it all flows fine. The action and the dialogue's a bit stilted, but that would have been the case in the original version.
That's really strange. So actually, it's Anthony Hopkins we're hearing.
Yeah, Anthony Hopkins in that 4-minute scene.
Doing a very good.
He does.
I think it's again, it's loaded, heaping on Crassus with look, this is a man who takes whatever he wants. He's got all the power, and he has absolutely no morals. And in 1960s, Western Europe and America, people still were uncomfortable with the idea of homosexuality or bisexuality. So it would have just seen him as a
creepy villain of the piece, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so back to the movie. We've got on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus riding amongst his troops. He gets on the high ground where they built some catapults, ballistae, and are training very hard for impending battles. Varinia is bathing children as Crassus speaks to a group of new arrivals, offering them the chance to join the slave army or return to their estates before their absence is noticed. This is where Spartacus meets Antoninus, who's now run away from Crassus, and he laughs when told that Antoninus can sing and perform feats of magic. Spartacus says, maybe you can make the Romans disappear. Then more montage of training scenes. The army is seen relaxing by their fires as Antoninus performs sleight of hand tricks, much to the delight of Spartacus, Varinia, and the troops. Antoninus then recites a poem, and afterwards, when Spartacus tells him that he can earn his stay by teaching them to sing, Antoninus argues that he came to fight. Then we have a fairly long scene of Spartacus and Varinia talking about life, the universe, and everything. Spartacus showing a very modern curiosity about science and the stars.
Reality, this is pretty close. I mean, they did establish a camp on the slopes of Vesuvius.
And it would have been, all ages and sexes and whatever. It was a real diverse community that would have collected escaped slaves.
Yeah, and it was decades before Vesuvius would erupt. In fact,
71 AD? 70 something? 79 AD. 79 AD.
Titus was the emperor, wasn't he? So
150 years later.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought initially that mentioning Vesuvius there is just a nice little thing to remind people that this is ancient Rome, but it actually is true. They did encamp around there in their first.
It's reasonably inaccessible, easily defensible, an ideal base from which to raid the wealthy Arab land surrounding it. Also a good point and a very prominent point to which escaping slaves could go to join the rebellion. The numbers of the army, as ever with ancient sources, are disputed. Some Roman writers claim that Spartacus eventually had 120,000 fighting men plus countless women and children, and this figure comes up time and again, 120,000, which we think seems to just be a number used to say lots of them. Yeah. And then when you talked about the Greeks and Persians, they'd say 1 million, which was basically just, there's more than I could count. We don't know. A conservative figure would be 60,000 armed slaves at the army's peak. Not all would have been well trained or armed, but that's a considerable army to confront if you're at the head of 10,000 legionaries. And in Glaber's case, even less. And this is interesting. Barry Strauss doesn't mention it, but I have read it in... Livy certainly goes into it, or the references to Livy about their... And Mike Duncan refers to it in the History of Rome episode on Spartacus, where they use this exponential training system, where one of the original 74 would train 10... picked, they look pretty competent, they've got some military experience, so someone with a head start, they'd train 10 of them. They would then go away and pick another 10 and train them, who would go away and pick another 10. So they all had a degree, although you can imagine the quality of that training and the soldiers giving it would have deteriorated as it went down and down the line.
Early version of Train the Trainer then.
But certainly one of the things that the Roman commanders who fought him would come back and say is they couldn't believe how disciplined and organised his army was, expecting it just to be a rabble, a mob.
Yeah, they made that mistake a few times, didn't they?
Yeah. Okay, so back to the movie.
Back in armour, Spartacus is seen in his tent, and he's advised that part of the Roman garrison is on its way. As rain pours outside, a Sicilian pirate chief arrives, Levantus, played by Herbert Lom, and he offers Spartacus passage across the sea and to freedom. Spartacus tells his guards to feed and release the slaves who accompany Levantus, who looks a little shocked. Spartacus tells him not to worry, he will pay him for them. Levantus tells Spartacus that it will cost 100 million sesterces per ship. 100,000 sesterces per ship. And for what Spartacus will need, the number of ships, it's going to cost 50 million. Spartacus says that they'll be in Brundisium in 7 months' time, and he gives a chest of gold now, so half up front and the rest on arrival in 7 months. The pirate tells Spartacus that he's going to lose and asks why he's doing what he's doing. Spartacus gives nothing away, so Levantus asks that if he could see his death and his army destroyed, would Spartacus still continue to fight?
If you looked into a magic crystal and you saw your army destroyed and yourself dead, if you saw that in the future, as I'm sure you're seeing it now, would you continue to fight?
Yes.
Knowing that you must lose?
All men lose when they die. All men die, but a slave and a free man lose different things.
They both lose life.
A free man dies, he loses the pleasure of life. A slave loses its pain. Death is the only freedom a slave knows. That's why he's not afraid of it.
So the reality check on that element, the encounter with the pirates did happen, but we believe it was much later in the campaign, and it wasn't actually in Brundisium, it was on the other side of the foot of Italy at Regia, but we'll come back to that. The scene we've just seen is fictional, but it does illustrate to a modern audience the stoical approach to life and death that many a slave is likely to have had, especially if the slave was a proud, competent former warrior of his people. You know, it's like, well, this is just dreadful, so what have I got to lose? It's quite possible as well that Kirk Douglas and his writing team wanted to make Spartacus a lifelong slave and a child of slaves to highlight the fact that in the US 100 years after the Civil War that was meant to free black slaves, many were still living in effective servitude, and to sort of illustrate how that might make them feel. Also, that they may well have amongst them people who are incredibly competent, effective leaders who might have been getting really, really angry by that stage. And it's probably a blessing for everyone who lived in the southern states that it was Martin Luther King and his peaceful, non-confrontational protest that
led to the change,
that won the day. Okay.
Back to the movie?
Back to the movie.
We see some scouts reporting to Spartacus one night that the 6 cohorts from Rome have bivouacked against some cliffs, but have built no stockade, which was typical for Romans, and they didn't do that. Spartacus leads a force out in the middle of the Hollywood night. It's meant to be dark, but we can see that it's not really, so we can follow the action. The next scene, we see some tents burning, eagle standards falling, and the slave army overrunning the surprised Romans. Glabrus, their leader, is brought before Spartacus, who mocks him for having played dead. The terrified Glabrus is told to take himself back to the Senate and give them a message from Spartacus telling them that Spartacus and his people want nothing from Rome, only to leave the country.
Yeah, in reality, Glaber, the commander of the Roman force, he was attacked, he didn't prepare properly, and they were backed up against these cliffs that they felt were impassable, but some of Spartacus's probably Thracian fellow countrymen who were mountain warriors, they used vine ropes to descend down the cliff
and surprise them.
Yeah,
I mean, incredible tactics.
Yeah,
completely surprised them, and I wonder why they didn't use that in the movie.
Yeah, there's really no detail, is it? You just see them riding off to attack them, and the next thing they've won.
And one thing that I don't think the movie makes plain is that in this surprise attack, Glaber had brought with him the symbol of Roman authority and legal, the fasces, the sticks bundled together with an axe, that was the supreme signal of ancient Roman legal authority.
Life and death.
I've got power of life and death from the Senate, and I'm here to defeat the slaves.
No, it's just his baton. They represented it, and Spartacus snaps it.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is like a French marshal's baton.
Yeah, that's right. But in reality, Spartacus had seized the standards and the fasces, the supreme symbol of Roman legal authority, and that would have,
And of course, that's where we get the modern word fascist.
Yeah, right.
From that fasces. It's the.
But the movie doesn't quite go there.
No. Then, hilariously, in the movie, we get intermission. You just get a blank blue screen with intermission written on it.
That's the third time we've had that. We had it for the second bounty. The second bounty had one too in the middle. So it was something early 60s. People expected intermission, and they were all three of them were very long films. This one over 3 hours.
Yeah. However, we're not going to take our intermission there because we've got a lot more reality check to come, even if we are halfway through the movie. So the movie returns to see Glabrus explaining himself in front of the Senate. He says, look, city garrisons are no match for this slave army. It's a job for the legions. He does admit he built no stockade or moat around his camp. And then his defence is, well, they're only slaves, which you can see boomerang straight into it. He realises as he says it how poor that makes him sound.
Yeah. Crassus, we then see leading the condemnation, and Glabrus is exiled for Rome in punishment. However, Crassus also admits that he's responsible in sponsoring Glabrus, and Crassus announces his retirement from command of his legions and from the Senate. The two of them stalking out, but not before Crassus hears Gracchus denounce his retirement as simply grandstanding.
Yeah, in reality, just to wrap that bit up, in reality we don't hear anything more about Glaber, the real commander of that detachment of Roman troops. He may have been killed, or he may have been, his poorly prepared camp meant that he was never given an appointment again. So he disappears from the historical record. And the attitude of, well, they're only slaves does seem to come up quite often in the early days of the rebellion, again and again, until they sort of start to actually take Spartacus. 3 or 4 major defeats
before they realise they're going to take him seriously.
I mean, their next move was to send another hastily raised force, again not much more than a militia, at this time under a senator named Publius Varinius. He also got beaten by Spartacus and Crassus, who were very much co-leaders. His men mainly ran away, and Varinius was able to reform them and would give chase to the rebel army, although he'd be beaten again when he caught up with them. He was pretty persistent,
but unsuccessful.
Not very good.
I think the movie does concentrate, several battles over several months or longer than a year into 1 or 2 key engagements.
And we'll come back to this again later. On the political front, Crassus wasn't actually that involved at this stage. He was pretty much in the background. The Senate were making decisions, sending people off, and there's no suggestion that he was at the forefront.
Politician?
No, not at this stage. He was still up and coming. He was due to be a consul, but he was still up and coming. And of course, the introduction of Julius Caesar earlier in the movie, he was listed as a military tribune, aged 27 in 71 BC. That's the last year of the rebellion that we haven't got to yet. But there's no suggestion he was actually in Italy. Because there was a war going on in the east against Mithridates, and a war in the west in Spain under Pompey. So we think because he'd spent a lot of time in the east, he probably was with Lucullus in the east fighting Mithridates, but no one really knows. But there's no suggestion he was in Italy fighting Spartacus.
Okay.
Which at this stage was still seen as a bit of a backwater. There's not much glory in beating slaves in the Roman eyes.
Okay, so back in the movie we see a huge group of people marching and riding across open country. Spartacus, his army and their followers are on their way. In a series of scenes, they wade through marsh and swamp, cross dry plains and forage through snowy hilltops. Then, back in sunnier climes, a virtual city is built up of tents and lean-tos. Spartacus and his council pore over maps and plan as the training goes on all around them. Spartacus is with Varinia and she tells him that they are going to have a child. He's overjoyed and gives Varinia one of those 1960s Hollywood kisses, closed mouth pressed against her face.
Yeah, it looks quite uncomfortable. They just sort of press their faces together. The reality on that the scenes illustrate one of the rebel army's major problems, that they were becoming victims of their own success, attracting new recruits, not only from the huge slave population of southern Italy, but from freemen who'd been dispossessed of their farms by rich landowners, buying them out, and they also, some of them joined the cause. And of course, anyone who fancied themselves as a bandit would have thought, wow, what a huge force of bandits, and would have thought they were like-minded. Although the numbers would have been welcome from a military point of view, Spartacus and Crassus had to feed them, and that started to become a bit of a major headache.
Okay, so back to the movie. We have the Senate continuing debate over what they need to do to defeat Spartacus. Caesar argues that if they let the slaves go, they'll never be able to control other slaves again. Gracchus suggests the appointment of Caesar himself to garrison commander of Rome, to cheers from the Senate. Meanwhile, the slave army are bringing in loot, fodder, food, and celebrating their continuing success. So back to Rome, Crassus is speaking to Julius Caesar privately and asks him why he's gone over to Gracchus and the mob. Caesar says Rome is the mob, to which Gracchus tells him he should come back to his own kind.
So we've heard that line before, haven't we, from Derek Jacobi's Senator Gracchus in Gladiator.
Yeah.
Rome is the mob. Yeah.
Caesar tells Gracchus that he won't betray Gracchus.
Crassus.
Sorry, thank you. Caesar tells Crassus that he won't betray Gracchus, to which Crassus replies that it's better to betray a friend than to betray Rome. Gracchus himself arrives at this point and offers Crassus command of the 3 legions raised to fight Spartacus. Crassus demands election as first consul, giving him control over the courts, to which Gracchus says the price is too high. Crassus then says, I know it is, for now, and leaves.
Yeah, I think the implication there is, yeah, well, that's my price, and when you get desperate enough, you'll come back to me. So again, we see the hard bargain driving, ruthless, I'll put my ambition before anything else.
Crassus, Gracchus reveals to Caesar that he has done a deal with the Sicilian pirates to ensure the slave army escapes from Italy, which he believes will leave Crassus high and dry without a popular victory. And Caesar looks shocked at that skullduggery.
Yeah, reality, there was no first consul at this stage of the Republic. There were just two consuls, equals, and they could veto each other, and they were seen. That's why they had them. They were a check on each other's powers. Julius Caesar already mentioned he almost certainly wasn't there. And whether there was a suggestion that the governor of Sicily may have bribed some pirates to not help the slave army because they were actually trying to get to Sicily, not from Brundisium, which is on the other side. Brundisium is on the heel of the foot of Italy, and Rhegium is on the toe. But yeah, again, we see that the politicking going on in the background,
which is true in spirit.
Yeah. Back to the movie, we see Crixus and some of the Spartacus's cavalry reach the sea, and they say they're 20 miles from Brundisium. They say the rest of the army will arrive too late to carry on, so they'll have to make camp on the beach. Antoninus, showing his academic skills, has calculated the rate at which they can load ships, but Spartacus is still demanding reports on Pompey's movements, sort of cuts across Antoninus and says, look, that's fine, but we need to know where Pompey is. Then Tigranes Levantus, played by Herbert Lom, the pirate, arrives. Spartacus shows him the rest of the treasure very proudly, says, look, we've got it all, and Levantus says, look, I've got bad news. Pompey and his army have landed in Italy, coming from Spain. Spartacus says, yeah, I know that, they're too far away, I'm getting daily reports. But then Levantus says, no, there's other bad news. Lucullus has his army aboard a Roman fleet, and they're due into Brundisium tomorrow. The Sicilian fleet has been obliged to withdraw. Now, Spartacus gets angry at this stage, and he says, hang on, the Sicilians can beat any Roman fleet afloat, implying they're not very good at seamen. So there must be another reason. Puts a knife to Levantus's throat, at which point he admits that Crassus has paid them off. And that baffles Spartacus, because he's like, well, Crassus has refused command of a legion, we know that, and yet he's making sure you stay here. So, yeah, he works out that Crassus intends the slave army to run before they're trapped between the armies of Pompey and Lucullus, and the only direction in which they can run is towards Rome, where Crassus will be able to meet them with all his legions, win a victory and gain all the glory. At this stage, Levantus offers to smuggle Spartacus, his family and close friends away in a boat. Spartacus tells him, go away.
So, we've got Pompey on the scene now. We've got two armies coming towards him. We've got Crassus playing all sorts of political games. How true is the movie to all that? The history.
It's taken bits and really changed it. I mean, what they actually did between the initial victory over Glaber's force and the final battle, that's over 2 years.
Yeah.
They beat and then eluded Varinius, the guy who was sent with a similar force to Glaber. But then Spartacus and Crassus broke up, and there's no record of what terms they broke apart. But one of the problems may have been feeding such a large group in one area. We also get the feeling, bearing in mind his Roman writers that we're getting these reports from, that Spartacus had a strategic aim in mind and was quite principled. Crassus just appears to wanted to steal stuff.
Yeah.
And he was a Celt. The loot of war was how they measured a man's honour. It was very important to them. So, and
he took the Celts and the Germans with him by the
certainly a large part of them that remain at the contemporary report suggests he had about 10,000 in the army with him, leaving Spartacus with somewhere between 40,000 and maybe up to 100, but we're pretty sure the higher figures are exaggerated. So he's not. The larger part remained with Spartacus, but a significant part has gone.
Yeah, they learned possibly before the split, and therefore encouraging it, that Rome had sent their 2 consuls out with full consular armies. That meant 2 legions apiece, made up of regular Roman legionaries, almost professional soldiers.
Yeah.
The consuls were Gnaeus Lentulus and Lucius Gallius. Gallius tracked down and beat Crassus in a battle in which we believe the Celtic leader was killed and his army scattered, captured or killed. Lentus marched on Spartacus, expecting Gallius to join him to boost their numbers. And it's here that we learn of Spartacus' attitude toward gladiatorial contests. When he learned of Crassus' defeat and death, he organised funeral games to mark the passing of his friend. He took 300 or 400 Roman prisoners and forced them to fight each other, gladiator style, for the amusement of his ex-slave army.
Yeah, and he was a lot more ruthless than the film portrays.
Yeah.
Although I do think, by the standards of the day, he does appear to have been quite principled, and it wasn't just lashing out for revenge. He did things for a reason, propaganda. And one of these would have been, we are now you and you are now us.
Yeah.
Lentulus finally caught up with Spartacus to be soundly beaten and his army put to flight, and this time this was a proper 2 Roman legions. He then showed his tactical nous and leadership, because he managed to turn his army around and hit Gallius as he marched to support Lentulus. Both defeated armies would retreat, regroup, unite, and then face up Spartacus again to be beaten again. And it's like, that's 3 times he's beaten consular armies. They were temporarily disgraced. The rebel army then marched for the Alps. On arrival at the foothills, they were met by more. The regional governor, Gaius Cassius Longinus, with 2 more full legions. Now, he's the regional governor. He's the father of the Cassius who would become famous or infamous as a leading assassin of Julius Caesar many years later. But he beat these two
up the Alps.
And then this is where something really strange and...
So just to... they've gone from the whole south of Italy, but
they were down in Vesuvius near Pompeii and Naples, Campania.
And then they made their way up to the Alps.
They fought
40,000 people.
All the way up, and they've reached the foothills of the Alps. They got into Cisalpine Gaul, which meant Gaul on this side of the Alps to the Romans. Yeah. They've beaten the governor and his forces. He's never heard of again, other than the father of Cassius, the murderer. But escape from Italy is now assured. There's no Roman forces left to prevent them crossing the Alps to freedom, and they don't. The whole army, Spartacus included, turned around and marched back to southern Italy. Now, I think Barry Strauss makes quite a convincing argument here of insurrection armies that have massive success. For a start, if they're an insurrectionist army, a revolutionary army, a rebel army, the people in the ranks get used to being heard and expect to be listened to. And he makes it clear that, if anything, we should be even more admiring of Spartacus and his leadership skills, because he managed to appear as the directing leader of this entire army, and they were not a disciplined army like the Romans with the articles of war where you could be flogged and crucified.
Yeah, and there's a suggestion somewhere that I picked up that says that a lot of the former slaves liked this success and the plundering and the loot that came with it, and they didn't want to go over the Alps to become a farmer or something.
It's likely that at least 25-30% of his army were Italian. Not Roman, but Italian.
Really?
Or they were slaves that had lived there all their lives. So Spartacus is trying to get home to Thrace. A lot of them I don't really want to go to these foreign, wild countries where hard, tough people like you live. I quite like it here. There's also a suggestion that the governor of Macedonia, who was Marcus Lucullus, not Lucius Lucullus, who was fighting Mithridates, his brother, had beaten some Thracian tribes and moved into Thrace from Macedonia or Macedonia. So Spartacus may have thought, well, I'm not sure there's a home to go to.
Right.
We don't know. But
yeah, it's the strangest turn in the whole real Spartacus story. That they went all that way far north and then started just to come back again.
Hook back round and come down. If Crassus was still there with the army, you'd have thought, well, Crassus, that's his time to shine. He's become the dominant leader, but Crassus is already dead. I mean, meanwhile, back in the movie, we're still down near Brundisium, where they're trying to work out what to do. We've actually got quite a bit of reality check to get through before, where we've got about a year to get through.
Yeah.
We won't take that long, folks, don't worry. Until we get to the point where the movie's got to. So I think what we'll do, we're comfortably over an hour now. I think we're going to call a halt here. We're going to come straight back in without doing intros and the story of the movie again, of course, and we'll pick it up from Spartacus and the army heading south back into Italy.
Due for publication on the 10th,
and that will happen on
later.
Sunday the 10th.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear that a week from today. Yeah, we won't make you wait another fortnight,
or for the summer break,
and then of course we'll have the winter
break,
the winter holiday break after that. Yeah, but we will come back absolutely hoofing and booting in early January. We're not quite sure what with yet.
No, but we'll let you know next week, I guess.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks very much,
guys.
folks, and we'll speak to you much sooner than usual.